Are you still planning? Chapter 1. The Life She Built. Delilah Perkins woke to the soft hum of her apartment's ancient refrigerator. A sound she'd grown so used to that she barely noticed it anymore. What she did notice, what she always noticed, was the quiet warmth of the morning. The kind that made her think of Mason before she even opened her eyes. She stretched, blinked at the ceiling, and smiled to herself. 27 years old, 4 years into a relationship that felt like a well-worn favorite sweater. Comfortable, dependable, and somehow still capable of making her heart flutter. She didn't need chaos or thrill or the dizzying uncertainty her friends insisted was part of modern dating. She had Mason, and Mason was enough. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text. Mason, morning. Sweetheart. Hope you slept well. Dinner tonight? I'm thinking pasta. She grinned, typing back quickly. Delilah, morning. Pasta sounds perfect. I'll bring dessert. She set the phone down and rolled out of bed, padding into the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed louder when she opened it, as if offended by the intrusion. She grabbed a yogurt, leaned against the counter, and let her thoughts drift to Mason. His calm voice, the way he listened like every word she said mattered, the way her father had taken one look at him and declared, finally, a man with sense. Her father didn't wait for a wedding to start calling Mason son. He'd started after the infamous golf course interrogation, 18 holes, no alcohol, and a level of scrutiny that would have made a CIA agent sweat. Mason had passed with flying colors, and her father had been his biggest cheerleader ever since. She finished her yogurt, got dressed, and headed out the door with a lightness in her step. It was Thursday, ordinary, predictable, and exactly the kind of day she liked. Work was its usual blur of emails, spreadsheets, and the occasional coworker popping by her desk to ask a question. She didn't mind. She liked her job well enough, even if it wasn't her passion. It paid the bills, kept her busy, and didn't interfere with her life outside the office. Around noon, she grabbed her purse and headed toward the lobby. Evan was already waiting, leaning casually against the wall with his hands in his pockets. He was friendly, polite, and easy to talk to. Nothing more. Their projects had overlapped recently, and lunch had become a convenient way to discuss details. She didn't think twice about it. Hey, he said with a small smile. Ready? Yep, she replied. I'm starving. They walked to the cafe down the street, chatting about work deadlines and the ridiculous number of meetings scheduled for next week. Evan had a dry sense of humor that made even the dullest topics entertaining, and Delilah appreciated that. It made lunch go faster. They ordered, sat, and continued talking. Everything felt normal, comfortable, even, until Evan set his fork down and looked at her with a calm, unreadable expression. So, he said, would you want to get drinks after work sometime? Delilah blinked. For a moment, she wondered if she'd misheard him. Drinks? After work? With her? Oh, she said, sitting up straighter. I have a boyfriend. She expected embarrassment, maybe surprise, but Evan didn't look either. He simply nodded, as if she'd confirmed something he already suspected. Tell me about him, he said. She hesitated, then smiled. He's wonderful. We've been together 4 years. He's steady, kind, and he listens. Really listens. My family loves him. My dad calls him son. Evan's expression softened. He sounds like one hell of a guy. He is, she said, warmth rising in her chest. I'm never letting him go. He's been convicted in a court of love and is getting a life sentence. Evan laughed. A real laugh. Not the polite kind people give when they're humoring you. That's a good one. She grinned, relieved the moment wasn't awkward. But then he leaned back, studying her with a thoughtful look. It sounds like you have something really special, he said. I do. He nodded slowly. I hope it works out the way you see it in your mind. But if you promise not to get angry with me, I'd like to give you some advice. Coworker to coworker. She tilted her head. Advice? Yeah. He gestured to the table between them. What is this? Lunch, she said, confused. For you, it's lunch, he replied. For me, it was getting to know someone I was interested in. You never mentioned your boyfriend before, so I thought you were available. Her mouth fell open. I what? I didn't know you saw this as anything more than lunch. He chuckled, but not unkindly. That's just how the game is played. Workplace romances are the top category of infidelity and divorce cases. People treat work like a dating app or a club, but without the music or ghosting. When a man asks a woman to lunch, it doesn't mean he's not interested. It means he is interested, and you open the door. She stared at him, shaken. She had never thought about optics or ulterior motives. She'd simply assumed everyone saw things the way she did. So what are you saying? She asked quietly. I'm saying men and women can't just be friends, he said. There's always an attraction factor. That's why you never see guys who are just friends hanging out with women they're not attracted to. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. I'm saying you were only looking at the situation from your perspective. She swallowed hard. The worst ones, he added, are the guys who know you're in a relationship and still try to position themselves. She exhaled slowly. I didn't realize. He smiled gently. If you really want to see if a man is good enough for you, Sit him, your father, and a bottle of whiskey alone for a few hours. You'll know. She laughed despite herself. My dad already interrogated him. 18 holes of golf. No alcohol. Evan laughed. Then he's probably a keeper. They finished lunch with the awkwardness gone, but her mind racing. Blind spots, optics, perception. She had never considered any of it. As they walked back to the office, she made a decision. She needed to talk to her father. And then she needed to talk to Mason. Chapter 2. The lunch that wasn't just lunch. Delilah spent the walk back to the office replaying Evan's words in her mind, each one landing with a weight she hadn't expected. She wasn't upset with him. He hadn't been cruel or mocking. If anything, he'd been strangely gentle, like someone offering directions to a traveler who didn't realize she'd wandered off the path. But she felt unsettled. By the time she reached her desk, her pulse had settled, but her thoughts hadn't. She sat, stared at her computer screen, and tried to focus on the spreadsheet she'd been working on before lunch. The numbers blurred. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard without moving. She had never thought of lunch as anything more than lunch. She had never thought of friendliness as anything more than friendliness. She had never thought of herself as someone who needed to be careful. But Evan's words had cracked open a door she didn't know existed. She exhaled slowly and forced herself to type a few lines. It didn't help. Her mind kept circling back. Men and women can't just be friends. You opened the door. You were only looking at the situation from your perspective. She rubbed her forehead, trying to ease the tension building behind her eyes. She wasn't naive. She wasn't oblivious. She simply trusted people to mean what she thought they meant. She trusted situations to be what they appeared to be. She trusted herself to know the difference. Apparently, she'd been wrong. A soft knock on her cubicle wall made her jump. Evan stood there, hands in his pockets, expression calm. Didn't mean to startle you, he said. It's okay, she replied, sitting up straighter. Just thinking. He nodded once as if he already knew. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. You didn't, she said quickly. Then, realizing that wasn't entirely true, she added, I mean, you surprised me, but I'm not upset. Good, he said. I wasn't trying to lecture you. I just figured, if you're serious about your guy, you should know how some men think. She swallowed. I appreciate that. Really. He gave a small smile. For what it's worth, I think you're one of the genuinely good ones. That's why I said something. She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. He tapped the cubicle wall lightly. If you ever need help with the project, I'm still around. Just different context. She managed a small laugh. Different context. He walked away, leaving her with a strange mix of relief and lingering discomfort. She didn't feel guilty. She hadn't done anything wrong, but she felt exposed, like someone had pointed out a blind spot she didn't know she had, and now she couldn't unsee it. She tried again to focus on work. It didn't take. Her thoughts kept drifting to Mason. How would he see this? Would he think she'd been careless? Would he think she'd been naive? Would he think she'd been inviting? Her stomach tightened. She trusted Mason completely, and he trusted her. She had never given him a reason not to. But trust wasn't just about intentions, it was about perception. And perception, apparently, was a trickier thing than she'd realized. By 3 o'clock, she'd made up her mind. She needed to talk to her father. Her father lived 15 minutes away, in a house that looked like it had been built specifically for a man who loved grilling, lawn care, and unsolicited advice. She pulled into the driveway, spotting him on the porch with a glass of iced tea and a newspaper he never actually read. He looked up as she approached. Well, look who's here. My favorite daughter. I'm your only daughter, she said, kissing his cheek. Still my favorite. She sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. He glanced at her, eyebrows lifting slightly. You've got that look, he said. The I need to talk but I don't want to start look. She sighed. I had lunch with a coworker today. Okay, he said slowly. And he asked me out for drinks. Her father's expression didn't change, but she saw the shift in his eyes. Alert, assessing. I told him I have a boyfriend, she said quickly. Obviously, he echoed. But then he said something. A lot of somethings, actually. Her father leaned back. Tell me. She recounted the conversation, Evan's perspective, his explanation of how men think, his comments about optics and boundaries, his warning about blind spots. Her father listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When she finished, he took a slow sip of iced tea. He's not wrong, he said. She stared at him. Dad. What? He asked. You want me to say he's wrong? He's not. Men think differently. They see opportunity where women see politeness. You're a good girl, Delilah. You don't play games. But not everyone thinks like you. I didn't know he saw lunch as anything more, she said quietly. Of course you didn't, her father replied. Because you weren't looking for anything. But he was. And that's the point. She looked down at her hands. Did I do something wrong? No, he said firmly. But you weren't mindful. There's a difference. She exhaled shakily. I don't want to hurt Mason. You won't, her father said. Not if you stay aware. Not if you keep your boundaries clear. You love that boy. Anyone can see it. She nodded, feeling a small wave of relief. Her father nudged her shoulder. Talk to him. Tell him what happened. He'll appreciate the honesty. She looked at him. You think so? I know so, he said. And if he's half the man I think he is, he'll handle it well. She smiled faintly. You really like him? Her father snorted. I interrogated him for 18 holes. If he survived that, he earned my respect. She laughed, tension easing from her shoulders. Her father patted her hand. Go home. Talk to your boy. She stood, hugged him, and walked back to her car with a clearer mind. Tonight, she would tell Mason everything. And she hoped, deeply sincerely, that he would understand. Chapter 3, Fathers, Daughters, and Uncomfortable Truths. Delilah drove home from her father's house with the windows cracked, letting the warm air wash over her. She'd expected reassurance, maybe a gentle laugh, maybe a don't worry, sweetheart, you're fine. Instead, she'd gotten agreement, expansion, a whole lecture she hadn't known she needed. She wasn't angry, she wasn't hurt, she was humbled. Her father had always been blunt, but he wasn't careless. If he said something, it was because he believed it mattered. And today, apparently, it mattered a lot. She pulled into her apartment complex, parked, and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. She needed to talk to Mason. She'd already decided that. But she wanted to do it right, calmly, clearly, without spiraling into apologies she didn't know. She took a breath, grabbed her purse, and headed inside. Her father's voice still echoed in her mind as she walked into her apartment. You weren't mindful. There's a difference. She kicked off her shoes, set her purse down, and sank onto the couch. The room felt too quiet, too still. She wished Mason were here already, but he wouldn't be off work for another hour. She pulled out her phone, hesitated, then called him. He answered on the second ring. Hey, sweetheart. His voice softened her immediately. Hi, are you still planning on coming over? Of course, he said. Everything okay? She paused. Yeah, I just want to talk to you about something. All right, he said gently. I'll be there soon. She hung up and exhaled. She didn't dread the conversation. She just wanted to handle it well. Her father had always been the kind of man who believed in clarity. He didn't sugarcoat. He didn't dance around topics. He didn't pretend things were fine when they weren't. And he'd raised her the same way, honesty first, always. She thought back to their conversation on the porch. You weren't mindful, he'd said. There's a difference. She'd asked him if she'd done something wrong. He'd said no. But he'd also said she needed to be aware of how men interpret things. She remembered the way he'd leaned back, studying her with that fatherly mix of affection and scrutiny. Men think differently, he'd said. They see opportunity where women see politeness. She'd frowned. But I wasn't being anything but polite. I know, he'd replied. But he didn't know that. And that's the point. She'd looked down at her hands, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and revelation. Her father had nudged her shoulder. Talk to Mason. He'll appreciate the honesty. She hoped he was right. Mason arrived just after 6, knocking lightly before letting himself in. He stepped inside with the same easy confidence he always carried, his smile warm and familiar. Hey, he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. You okay? She nodded, gesturing for him to sit beside her. Yeah, I just had a weird day. He sat, turning toward her. Tell me. She took a breath. I had lunch with a coworker today, Evan. He nodded. The guy from your project? Yeah, we've had lunch a few times because our work overlaps. I didn't think anything of it. She paused. But today he asked me out for drinks. Mason's expression didn't change. He didn't stiffen or frown. He simply listened. I told him I have a boyfriend, she continued, and he wasn't upset. He just asked me to tell him about you. Mason's lips twitched. Okay, so I did, she said. And then he told me something. A lot of things, actually. She explained Evan's perspective, how he'd seen their lunches as interest, how he'd assumed she was available because she'd never mentioned Mason, how he'd said men and women can't just be friends, how he talked about optics and boundaries and blind spots. Mason listened without interrupting, his expression steady and thoughtful. And then, she said quietly, I went to talk to my dad. Mason's eyebrows lifted slightly. Your dad? She nodded. I told him everything, and he agreed with Evan. He said I wasn't wrong, but I wasn't mindful. He said men think differently. He said I need to be aware of how things look. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know I was giving the wrong impression. I didn't know he saw lunch as anything more. Mason reached over and took her hand gently. Sweetheart, he said softly, I'm not upset. She looked up, relief flickering through her chest. But, he continued, I'm glad you told me. She nodded, swallowing. He squeezed her hand. Perception can be more powerful than reality. If you're ever in a position that requires explanation, then something about the situation was already off. She exhaled slowly. I didn't think about it like that. I know, he said, because you weren't looking for anything. You were just being you. But not everyone sees things the way you do. She felt her eyes sting. Not with tears, but with emotion. I don't want to hurt you. You won't, he said gently. You're honest. You're loyal. You take us seriously. That's why I trust you. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. I'm not worried about you, he said. I'm just glad you're aware now. She nodded against him. I am. They sat quietly for a moment, the room warm and still. Mason kissed the top of her head. Thank you for telling me. She closed her eyes, letting the comfort of his presence settle her. Her father had been right. Mason handled it well. Better than well. He handled it like a man who loved her. Later, as they made dinner together, pasta simmering, garlic bread warming, Delilah felt lighter. Not because the conversation had been easy, but because it had been honest. She had faced a blind spot she didn't know she had, and instead of judgment, she'd found understanding. She glanced at Mason as he stirred the sauce, humming under his breath. She loved him. She always had. But tonight, she loved him with a deeper clarity. And she knew exactly what she wanted to protect. Chapter 4. The conversation that matters. Dinner simmered quietly on the stove, filling the apartment with the warm scent of tomatoes and basil. Delilah stood beside Mason, slicing bread while he stirred the sauce with the kind of casual confidence that made even cooking look effortless. She kept glancing at him, not nervously but thoughtfully, still absorbing the calm way he'd handled everything she told him. He hadn't been defensive. He hadn't been suspicious. He hadn't been hurt. He'd simply listened. And now, as he hummed under his breath, she felt a tenderness so deep it made her chest ache. You're staring, Mason said without looking up. She blinked. I'm not. You are, he said, amusement threading through his voice. I can feel it. She nudged him lightly with her elbow. I'm allowed to look at you. He finally glanced over, eyes warm. I'm not complaining. She smiled, then set the bread aside and leaned against the counter. Thank you, she said softly. For what? He asked, turning off the stove. For how you handled everything. He set the spoon down and faced her fully. Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. You told me the truth. That's what matters. She nodded, but her thoughts still swirled. I just didn't realize how things looked. I wasn't thinking about optics. I was just thinking about work. I know, he said, and that's why I'm not upset. She hesitated. Were you surprised? A little, he admitted. Not because I thought you'd do anything questionable. Just because I didn't know you were having lunch with him. She winced. I should have mentioned it. He shook his head. Not because you owe me a report, but because communication keeps things clear. She exhaled. I didn't think it mattered. It didn't, he said gently. Until it did. She looked down at her hands. I don't want to be careless. You're not, he said. You're learning. That's different. She felt her throat tighten. I don't want you to ever doubt me. I don't, he said immediately. And I won't. But trust isn't just about what you do. It's about what situations you allow yourself to be in. She nodded slowly. That's what my dad said. Mason chuckled. Your dad is a wise man. Terrifying, but wise. She laughed, tension easing. He told me men think differently, that they see opportunity where women see politeness. He's right, Mason said. Not all men, but enough. She leaned her hip against the counter. I didn't know Evan saw lunch as anything more. That's the blind spot, Mason said. You weren't looking for anything, so you assumed he wasn't either. She sighed. I feel stupid. Don't, he said firmly. You're kind. You're open. You assume good intentions. That's not stupidity. That's goodness. She felt her eyes warm. I just want to protect what we have. You do, he said. By being honest. By talking to me. By caring enough to reflect on it. She stepped closer, resting her hands on his chest. I love you. He smiled softly. I love you too. They stood like that for a moment, the quiet of the kitchen wrapping around them like a warm blanket. Then Mason kissed her forehead and pulled away slightly. Let's eat, he said, before the pasta turns into glue. She laughed, wiping her eyes. Good plan. Dinner was simple but perfect. They sat at the small table by the window, plate steaming, conversation easy. Mason told her about his day. An annoying client, a coworker who kept misplacing files, a funny moment involving a spilled coffee, and a very dramatic apology. Delilah listened, grateful for the normalcy, grateful for the steadiness, grateful for him. When they finished eating, Mason leaned back in his chair. Can I say something? Of course. I'm proud of you, he said. She blinked. Proud? Yes, he said. You didn't hide anything. You didn't minimize it. You didn't wait for it to become a problem. You came to me immediately. She felt her chest warm. I didn't want anything between us. And nothing is, he said, because you handled it with honesty. She looked down at her empty plate, then back at him. I didn't realize how much perception matters. It does, he said. People make assumptions. They fill in blanks. They interpret things based on their own experiences. She nodded. I guess I thought intentions were enough. Intentions matter, he said. But clarity matters too. She leaned forward. I'll be more mindful. He reached across the table and took her hand. I know. They sat quietly for a moment, fingers intertwined. Then Mason squeezed her hand lightly. You know what this tells me? What? That you're ready for the hard parts of forever. She felt her breath catch. Forever. He smiled. That's what we're building, isn't it? She nodded, heart swelling. Yes. Then this is part of it, he said. Learning, communicating, adjusting, growing. She swallowed. I want that. With you. You have it, he said. Later, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen was quiet again, they curled up on the couch. Mason rested his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. She thought about Evan's words, her father's advice, Mason's calm understanding. She thought about how easily things could have gone differently, how a misunderstanding could have grown into something bigger if she hadn't spoken up. But she had, and Mason had met her honesty with love. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle deep inside her. She wasn't perfect. She didn't need to be. She just needed to be intentional. And she would be. For him. For them. For the future they were building together. Chapter 5. Recalibrating her world. Friday morning arrived with the kind of brightness that made the city look freshly washed. Delilah stepped out of her apartment feeling lighter than she had the day before. The conversation with Mason had settled something inside her. Something she hadn't even realized was unsettled until Evan's words had cracked it open. She wasn't ashamed of her blind spot. She wasn't defensive about it either. She simply understood it now. And understanding meant she could adjust. She walked into the office with a quiet confidence, greeting coworkers with her usual warmth. Nothing dramatic had changed about her behavior, but her awareness had sharpened. She noticed things she hadn't noticed before, how people positioned themselves, how conversations lingered, how friendliness could be interpreted differently depending on who was doing the interpreting. It wasn't paranoia. It was mindfulness. She liked the difference. Around noon, she grabbed her purse and headed toward the break room. She wasn't planning on lunch with Evan today. Not because she was avoiding him, but because she wanted to reset the dynamic. She wanted to make sure the boundaries were clear. Not rigid, not cold, just unmistakable. As she filled her water bottle, she heard footsteps behind her. Evan. Hey, he said, offering a small smile. Hi, she replied, returning it. He leaned against the counter. Heading out for lunch? Yeah, she said. I'm meeting a friend. It wasn't a lie. She texted her friend Marissa that morning and asked if she wanted to grab a quick bite. Evan nodded. Good. I didn't want things to be weird. They're not, she said. I just want to be mindful. He chuckled softly. I figured. She capped her water bottle. Thanks again for being honest with me. He shrugged. Honesty's easier than pretending. She smiled. Well, I appreciate it. He tapped the counter lightly. If you ever need help with the project, I'm still around. I know, she said. And I'll ask if I do. He gave a small salute and walked out, leaving her with a sense of closure she hadn't expected. The awkwardness was gone. The dynamic was reset. And she felt good. Really good. Lunch with Marissa was a welcome distraction. They sat at a small cafe, sipping iced tea while Marissa recounted her latest dating disaster. A man who claimed he was emotionally available, but cried when the waiter asked if he wanted lemon in his water. Delilah laughed so hard she nearly choked. You're lucky, Marissa said, pointing her straw at her. You found a unicorn. A real one. Not the kind that says he's emotionally mature because he owns a plant. Delilah grinned. I know I'm lucky. No, Marissa said. You're blessed. Mason is the kind of guy who actually listens, and he doesn't play games, and he doesn't disappear for 3 days because he lost track of time. Delilah shook her head. He's steady. I love that about him. Marissa leaned forward. You look different today. Different how? Calmer, Marissa said. Like you figured something out. Delilah paused, then nodded. I think I did. Marissa raised an eyebrow. Want to tell me? Delilah hesitated, then explained the lunch with Evan, the unexpected conversation, her father's advice, and Mason's response. Marissa listened with wide eyes, occasionally muttering things like, men are wild, and your dad is a national treasure. When Delilah finished, Marissa sat back. Well, that's a lot. It was, Delilah agreed. But, Marissa said, pointing her straw again, you handled it perfectly, and Mason handled it perfectly, and your dad handled it, aggressively, but perfectly. Delilah laughed. That sounds about right. Marissa nodded. You're good, Dee. You're solid. You're not careless. You just didn't know. And now you do. Delilah felt warmth spread through her chest. Yeah, I think that's it. They finished lunch with easy conversation, and when Delilah walked back to the office, she felt grounded. Not shaken. Not uncertain. Just grounded. The afternoon passed quickly. She worked through her tasks with renewed focus, occasionally catching glimpses of coworkers chatting, laughing, moving through their day. She saw things differently now, not suspiciously but clearly. She understood that friendliness could be misread. She understood that politeness could be mistaken for interest. She understood that boundaries weren't walls, they were guardrails. And she understood that protecting her relationship wasn't about avoiding people. It was about being intentional. Around 4, she received a text from Mason. Mason, thinking about you. Want to do something tonight? She smiled. Delilah, yes, something simple. Just us. Mason, perfect. She slipped her phone into her purse, feeling a flutter of anticipation. Not the nervous kind, the warm kind, the kind that came from knowing she was choosing him deliberately. When she left the office, she felt lighter than she had in days. The city buzzed around her, but she moved through it with a quiet certainty. She wasn't worried about blind spots anymore. She wasn't worried about misinterpretations. She was aware. She was intentional. She was committed. And she was ready to show Mason, not through explanations or apologies, but through action, just how much she valued what they had. Tonight, she would plan something small but meaningful. Something that reflected their history, their humor, their quiet steadiness. Something that wasn't grand or dramatic, but deeply personal. She walked toward her car with a smile. She knew exactly what she wanted to do, and she knew exactly who she wanted to do it for. Chapter 6. The Gesture of Forever. Delilah spent the drive home thinking about Mason. Not in the dreamy, romantic way she usually did, but in a deliberate, purposeful way. She wanted tonight to mean something, not because anything was broken, but because something had shifted. She saw her relationship with new clarity now, and she wanted to honor that. She stopped at a small bakery on the way home, picking out the dessert she knew Mason loved most. A lemon tart with a buttery crust and a ridiculous amount of powdered sugar. The cashier boxed it carefully, and Delilah carried it out like it was a fragile treasure. When she reached her apartment, she set the tart on the counter and surveyed the space. It wasn't messy, but it wasn't special either. She wanted special. Not extravagant, just intentional. She lit 2 candles, dimmed the lights, and put on the playlist Mason had made her last year. Soft, warm music filled the room. She changed into a simple dress. Nothing dramatic, just something she knew he liked, and took a breath. She wasn't nervous. She was excited. Mason arrived right on time, knocking lightly before stepping inside. He paused in the doorway, taking in the candles, the music, the dress. Well, he said, smiling slowly, this is a nice surprise. She felt her cheeks warm. I wanted to do something for us. He closed the door behind him and walked toward her, his expression softening with every step. You look beautiful. Thank you, she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Dinner's simple, but dessert is fancy. He laughed. Fancy dessert is my favorite kind. She led him to the table, where she'd set 2 plates, 2 glasses, and the lemon tart in the center like a centerpiece. Mason pulled out her chair for her, and she sat, feeling a flutter of affection. He took his seat across from her. What's the occasion? No occasion, she said. Just us. He nodded, eyes warm. I like that. They ate slowly, talking about small things, weekend plans, a movie they wanted to watch, her friend Marissa's dramatic dating stories. The conversation flowed easily, but beneath it was a quiet intimacy, a shared understanding of what the last 2 days had meant. When they finished eating, Mason leaned back in his chair. This was perfect. I'm glad, she said. He studied her for a moment. You're thinking about something. She hesitated. I'm thinking about us. He nodded once. Tell me. She folded her hands on the table. I didn't realize how much I take for granted. Not you, never you, but the way things look, the way people interpret things, the way small choices can mean something different to someone else. He listened, expression steady. I want to be intentional, she said softly. Not because I'm afraid of anything happening, but because I want to protect what we have. I want to make sure I'm always choosing you clearly. Mason's eyes softened. You do choose me clearly. I want to make sure I always do, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand. Sweetheart, you're doing everything right. You're honest. You're thoughtful. You're loyal. You're not careless, you're just learning. She felt her throat tighten. I love you. He squeezed her hand. I love you too. They sat quietly for a moment, the candles flickering gently between them. Then Mason stood, walked around the table and held out his hand. Come here. She took it, letting him pull her to her feet. He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she rested her hands on his shoulders. You don't have to prove anything to me, he said softly. But I love that you want to show me how much you care. She smiled. I do. He brushed a thumb along her cheek. I care too. More than you know. She leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. His heartbeat was steady, familiar, grounding. After a moment, he pulled back slightly. Dance with me. She laughed. There's barely any space. We'll make it work. He took her hand and guided her into a slow sway, the music soft and warm around them. They moved gently, her cheek resting against his shoulder, his hand warm at her waist. It wasn't a dramatic moment. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. It was them. As they danced, Mason spoke quietly. You know what I thought when you told me everything? What? That you're the kind of woman who builds a life, not a moment. She felt her breath catch. A life. Yes, he said. You don't chase thrills. You don't play games. You don't look for attention. You look for forever. And you found it. Her eyes stung. With you. With me, he said. And I'm not going anywhere. She closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep inside her. Forever. She wanted it. She'd always wanted it. But tonight, she felt it with a new certainty. One shaped by honesty, clarity, and the quiet strength of their bond. When the song ended, Mason pulled back just enough to look at her. I have something for you. She blinked. For me? He nodded. Wait here. He walked to his jacket, reached into the pocket, and returned with a small velvet pouch. Not a ring box. She noticed that immediately, but something soft, something meaningful. He handed it to her. Open it. She untied the string and pulled out a delicate gold necklace with a tiny charm shaped like a key. She looked up at him. A key. He nodded. To remind you that you already hold the important things. You don't need to worry about losing them. Her eyes warmed. Mason, it's not a proposal, he said gently. Not yet, but it's a promise. She felt her heart swell. I love it. He smiled. Good. She stepped forward and hugged him tightly, the necklace pressed between them. Tonight wasn't about grand gestures. It was about intention. It was about clarity. It was about choosing each other deliberately. And they had. Later, as they curled up on the couch with the candles still flickering, Delilah rested her head on Mason's shoulder and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not excitement, not infatuation, but certainty. She knew where her life was going. She knew who she wanted beside her. And she knew she was ready for whatever came next. Chapter 7. A test of trust. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of lazy sunlight that made everything feel slower, softer. Delilah woke to the sound of birds outside her window and the faint smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Mason was already up. He always woke earlier on weekends. And she smiled as she slipped out of bed and padded toward the living room. He stood at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. When he saw her, he grinned. Morning, sweetheart. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind. Morning. He kissed her forehead. Coffee? Yes, please. They settled on the couch, mugs warm in their hands, the quiet comfortable. Delilah felt peaceful, more peaceful than she had in days. Everything felt aligned now, clear, intentional. But peace, she would soon learn, had a way of being tested. Around noon, her phone buzzed with a message from Marissa. Marissa, girl, you're not going to like this. Call me. Delilah frowned. She excused herself to the bedroom and dialed. Marissa answered immediately. Okay, don't panic. That's a terrible way to start, Delilah said. I know, Marissa said. But listen, one of my coworkers, Jenny, works in your building. She said she overheard something yesterday. Delilah's stomach tightened. Overheard what? Marissa hesitated. She said she heard 2 people talking about you. Something about you having lunch with a guy who was obviously into you. And that you were playing dumb. Delilah felt her pulse spike. What? Who said that? I don't know, Marissa said. Jenny didn't recognize the voices, but she said the tone wasn't nice. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the phone. I wasn't playing anything. I didn't even know he was interested. I know, Marissa said. And Jenny said she defended you. But she thought you should know. Delilah closed her eyes. Great. So now people think I'm what? Leading someone on. People love drama, Marissa said. They'll invent it if they have to. Delilah exhaled shakily. I need to tell Mason. Do you want me to come over? No, Delilah said. I'm okay. I just need to talk to him. Call me later, Marissa said gently. I will. Delilah hung up and sat still for a moment, letting the frustration settle. She wasn't angry at Evan. She wasn't angry at Marissa. She was angry at the situation, the way a harmless misunderstanding had turned into gossip. She stood, squared her shoulders, and walked back to the living room. Mason looked up from the couch. Everything okay? She sat beside him. I need to tell you something. He set his mug down. All right. She took a breath. Marissa called. She said one of her coworkers overheard people at my office talking about me. About the lunch with Evan. Mason's expression didn't shift, but she saw the alertness in his eyes. What did they say? That I was having lunch with a guy who was obviously into me. And that I was playing dumb. Mason leaned back slowly. I see. I wasn't, she said quickly. I didn't know. I wasn't being careless. I wasn't being flirty. I genuinely didn't know. I know, he said calmly. She swallowed. I hate that people think that. People think a lot of things, Mason said. Most of them aren't true. She looked down at her hands. I don't want rumors about me. I don't want anything that makes you look at me differently. He reached over and took her hand. Sweetheart, I don't look at you differently. But, no, he said gently. Listen, perception matters, yes. But gossip is noise. It's not truth. You told me everything. You were honest. You didn't hide anything. That's what matters. She felt her throat tighten. I just don't want anything to hurt us. It won't, he said. Because we're not built on rumors. We're built on trust. She exhaled slowly. I still feel awful. I know, he said. But you didn't do anything wrong. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. After a moment, he spoke softly. Do you want my advice? Yes. Let it go. She blinked. Let it go. Yes, he said. You already corrected the blind spot. You already set boundaries. You already talked to me. There's nothing left to fix. She hesitated. But people think whatever makes their day more interesting, he said. You can't control that. You can only control what you do. She closed her eyes. I hate that this happened. I know, he said. But it's a test. And you passed. She looked up at him. Passed? Yes, he said. You didn't hide it. You didn't panic. You didn't try to explain it away. You came straight to me. She felt warmth spread through her chest. I guess I did. He smiled. You're good at this. At us. She laughed softly. I try. You do more than try, he said. You show up. You communicate. You care. She leaned forward and kissed him, slow and grateful. When she pulled back, she whispered, Thank you. For what? For trusting me. He brushed a thumb along her cheek. You make it easy. Later that afternoon, they went for a walk through the park. The air was warm, the trees full, the paths busy with families and joggers and dogs who looked far too excited to exist. Delilah held Mason's hand, feeling the steadiness of him beside her. She wasn't thinking about gossip anymore. She wasn't thinking about blind spots. She wasn't thinking about perception. She was thinking about him, about them, about how easily a misunderstanding could have become a wedge, and how easily honesty had prevented it. As they walked, Mason squeezed her hand lightly. You know, he said, this whole thing just proves something. What? That we're good at handling the hard parts. She smiled. We are. And that, he said, is what makes forever work. She felt her heart swell. I want forever with you. He looked at her, eyes warm. You have it. They continued walking, the sunlight filtering through the trees, the path stretching ahead of them like a promise. Promise she was ready to keep. Chapter 8. The future they choose. Sunday afternoon carried a gentle quiet, the kind that made the world feel softer around the edges. Delilah sat on her parents' porch swing, legs tucked beneath her, listening to the creak of the chains as she swayed. Her father stood at the grill, flipping burgers with the seriousness of a man performing a sacred ritual. Her mother arranged a tray of sliced watermelon like it was a centerpiece for a royal banquet. Family gatherings were always loud, chaotic, and full of unsolicited advice. Today, though, felt different, calmer, more intentional. Maybe because she felt different. Maybe because she'd grown in ways she hadn't expected. Mason arrived carrying a bowl of potato salad her mother had requested. He stepped onto the porch, spotted Delilah, and smiled in that quiet way that made her heart lift. Hey, he said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. Hi, she replied, scooting over so he could sit beside her. Her father glanced over. There he is, my favorite son. Mason chuckled. I'm your only son. Still my favorite, her father said, flipping a burger with dramatic flair. Delilah laughed, nudging Mason's shoulder. He's been waiting to say that. I could tell, Mason said. Her mother stepped out with the watermelon tray. You two look cozy. Good. Stay that way. Delilah rolled her eyes affectionately. Mom. What? Her mother asked. I'm allowed to enjoy my daughter's happiness. Mason grinned. We're happy. Her mother beamed. I know. They settled into easy conversation, weekend plans, neighborhood gossip, her father's insistence that his grill was superior to all other grills in the tri-state area. Delilah watched Mason interact with her parents. The way he listened to her father's stories, the way he laughed at her mother's jokes, the way he fit so seamlessly into the rhythm of her family. It wasn't new, but today she saw it with new clarity. Her father called them over when the food was ready. They gathered around the patio table, plates piled high, drinks sweating in the summer heat. Conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional dramatic retelling of a childhood mishap. Halfway through the meal, her father cleared his throat. Mason. Mason looked up. Yes, sir? Her father leaned back, folding his arms. I've been thinking. Oh boy, Delilah muttered. Her father ignored her. You're a good man. Mason blinked. Thank you. No, her father said. I mean it. You're steady. You're respectful. You don't play games. You treat my daughter the way she deserves to be treated. Delilah felt her cheeks warm. Dad. Her father held up a hand. Let me finish. She sighed. Fine. Her father turned back to Mason. I gave you 18 holes of interrogation. You passed. I've watched you for 4 years. You've never given me a reason to doubt you. Not once. Mason nodded, expression earnest. I care about her. A lot. I know, her father said. And I want you to know something. Mason straightened slightly. Okay. Her father's voice softened. You have my blessing. For whatever comes next. Delilah froze. Her mother gasped. Oh, Harold. You can't just say it like that. Her father shrugged. Why not? It's true. Mason looked stunned. Quietly stunned. The kind of stunned that made his eyes soften and his breath catch. Delilah stared at her father. Dad, you can't just… I can, he said. And I did. Her mother swatted his arm. You're supposed to wait until he asks. He already knows, her father said. I'm not subtle. Delilah covered her face with her hands. Oh my God. Mason reached over and gently pulled her hands away. Hey. She looked at him, heart racing. He smiled softly. It's okay. She swallowed. Is it? Yes, he said. Because he's right. Her breath caught. Right? Mason took her hand beneath the table, his thumb brushing her knuckles. I've been thinking about our future, about what we're building, about what I want with you. Her pulse quickened. Mason. He didn't pull out a ring. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't make a grand gesture. He simply held her hand and spoke with quiet certainty. I'm not proposing today, he said gently. Not because I'm unsure, but because I want the moment to be ours. Not a surprise ambush from your father. Her father huffed. It wasn't an ambush. Her mother elbowed him. It absolutely was. Mason continued, eyes steady on Delilah. But I want you to know something. I'm moving toward forever. Intentionally. Deliberately. With you. Her eyes warmed. I am too. He squeezed her hand. Good. Her father sniffed. Well, now that that's settled. Someone passed the ketchup. Delilah laughed, the tension dissolving into warmth. Mason leaned over and kissed her temple, lingering for a moment. The rest of the meal unfolded with renewed lightness. Her mother fussing, her father pretending he hadn't caused chaos, Mason smiling quietly beside her. Delilah felt surrounded by love, by certainty, by the future she wanted. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the sun dipped low, Delilah and Mason walked down the sidewalk hand in hand. The air was warm, the sky streaked with gold, the world humming softly around them. She looked up at him. You handled that well, he chuckled. Your father is… enthusiastic. That's one word for it. Mason stopped walking, turning to face her. You know he loves you. And he loves us. She nodded. I know. He brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. And I meant what I said. Her heart fluttered. I know. He kissed her, slow, warm, certain. When he pulled back, he whispered, We're building something real. She smiled. We are. They resumed walking, fingers intertwined, steps in sync. The future wasn't a question. It was a direction. And they were walking toward it together. Epilogue. 3 months later. 3 months later. Autumn settled over the city like a warm quilt, gold leaves drifting across sidewalks, crisp air curling around street corners, the kind of weather that made everything feel a little more romantic. Delilah stood in her apartment, suitcase half-packed, staring at Mason with a mixture of suspicion and amusement. You're being weird, she said, narrowing her eyes. Mason zipped his own suitcase with exaggerated innocence. I'm not being weird. You're absolutely being weird. He grinned. Maybe. But it's a good weird. She crossed her arms. Where are we going? It's a surprise. She groaned. I hate surprises. No, he said, walking over to kiss her forehead. You hate bad surprises. This one's good. She tried to hold onto her skepticism, but his smile made it impossible. Fine. But if you're taking me camping, I'm breaking up with you. He laughed. Sweetheart, I know you. I'm not taking you anywhere that doesn't have indoor plumbing. She relaxed. Okay, that's fair. They finished packing, grabbed their jackets, and headed out. Mason drove with a quiet confidence, refusing to answer any of her questions about their destination. She tried guessing beach, mountains, vineyard, but he only shook his head, amused. After an hour, he pulled into a small town she recognized instantly. Her breath caught. Mason, he smiled. You remember. Of course she remembered. Their first date had been here, a tiny restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, the kind of place that felt like a secret. She remembered the way he'd looked at her across the table, the way he'd listened, the way she'd walked out afterward thinking, this could be something real. He parked the car and turned to her. Come on. She followed him down the sidewalk, her heart fluttering with nostalgia. The restaurant looked exactly the same, warm lights glowing through the windows, the faint smell of garlic and rosemary drifting into the street. Inside, the host greeted them with a smile. Welcome. Table for two. Mason nodded. Yes, under Mason Hale. The host's smile widened knowingly. Right this way. Delilah frowned. Why did he smile like that? Mason shrugged. Maybe he likes my name. She elbowed him lightly. You're hiding something. Maybe. They were led to a small corner table, the same one they'd sat at on their first date. Delilah felt her chest warm. You remembered the table. I remember everything, he said softly. They ordered dinner, talked, laughed, reminisced. It felt like stepping back in time, but with the comfort of everything they'd built since. When dessert arrived, lemon tart, of course. Mason grew quiet. Delilah noticed immediately. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said. Something's right. He stood. Her heart stopped. Mason. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not a pouch. Not a symbolic charm. A ring box. Her breath caught. Oh my God. He knelt beside the table, eyes warm, steady, full of certainty. Delilah Perkins, he said, voice soft but unwavering. You are the best part of my life. You're kind, loyal, intentional, and you love with your whole heart. I want to spend every chapter of my life with you. Not a continuation of what we've had, something new, something next, something forever. Her eyes blurred with tears. He opened the box. Will you marry me? She didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Yes, she whispered. Then louder, laughing through tears. Yes, of course yes. He stood, slipped the ring onto her finger, and she threw her arms around him, kissing him with all the joy she'd been holding inside. The restaurant erupted in applause, but she barely heard it. All she felt was him, his arms around her, his breath against her cheek, the warmth of the moment settling into her bones. They sat again, hands intertwined, both laughing in disbelief. You planned this, she said. Every detail, he replied. It's perfect. You're perfect. She shook her head, smiling. I love you. I love you too. When they returned home the next day, their first stop wasn't the apartment. It was her parents' house. Her father opened the door before they even knocked. There you are. I've been waiting all morning. Delilah blinked. For what? Her father looked at Mason, eyes narrowing with suspicion and excitement. Well, did you do it? Mason smiled. Yes, sir. Her father's face lit up like someone had flipped a switch. Finally, her mother rushed forward, gasping when she saw the ring. Oh my goodness. Delilah. Mason. Oh, sweetheart. Look at you. Delilah laughed as her mother hugged her tightly. Mom, I can't breathe. Her father grabbed Mason's hand and shook it with enough force to rattle bones. Welcome to the family officially, son. Mason chuckled. Thank you. Her father turned to Delilah, eyes gleaming. All right, marriage is settled. Now we move on to the next goal. She groaned. Dad. Grandchildren, he declared proudly. I want at least 3, preferably 4. And I want the first one before I'm too old to chase them. Her mother swatted his arm. Harold, stop it. No, he said. This is my moment. Delilah laughed so hard she had to lean against Mason for support. Dad, we just got engaged. Exactly, he said. Time to plan ahead. Mason wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We'll get there, one chapter at a time. Her father nodded sagely. Fine, but I'm buying baby books. Her mother sighed. Lord help us. Delilah looked up at Mason, heart full, future bright. This wasn't the continuation of the life they had. It was the beginning of the next chapter, and she couldn't wait to write it with him.